The Pacific Ocean occupies more space than any other body of water on Earth. It covers more than one-third of the planet's surface and contains thousands of islands, most of them small, uninhabited, and rarely visited. Between these points of land lies an expanse that can take weeks to cross even by modern vessels. In many areas, there are no shipping lanes, no regular air traffic, and no consistent radio coverage. The ocean appears uniform from above, but at sea level it shifts constantly, with swells that rise and fall without visible pattern. Off the western coast of Mexico, the Pacific begins as a relatively narrow corridor of fishing routes. Small boats leave ports in Baja California and travel outward into deeper water, sometimes for days at a time. These vessels are built for short journeys, not long endurance. They carry limited fuel, simple navigation tools, and supplies calculated for narrow margins. Once they move beyond the coastal current, they are exposed to open ocean systems that can carry a drifting object hundreds of miles in a single month. Weather in this region is usually stable. Trade winds blow steadily, and storms tend to be seasonal. For most of the year, fishermen rely on this predictability. The water temperature remains moderate, and rain is infrequent. From the deck of a small boat, the horizon forms a flat, uninterrupted circle. There are no visual reference points once land disappears. Distance becomes difficult to measure. Direction becomes abstract. In this environment, separation does not announce itself. It occurs quietly. A vessel can pass beyond recovery range without any visible change in the water or sky. The boat continues to float. The engine may still run. The sea does not signal that anything has gone wrong. Only later does the absence of contact become permanent. The silence begins without warning and extends in all directions. In November 2012, Salvador Alvarenga left the small fishing village of Costa Azul, located on the Pacific coast of Chiapas, Mexico. The settlement consisted of a short stretch of shoreline, several wooden homes, and a single launch area for small commercial boats. Fishing was the primary source of income in the region. Most trips lasted no more than a few days and stayed within a limited distance from land. Alvarenga was an experienced fisherman, originally from El Salvador. He had been working in Mexico for several years and was known locally for taking longer routes than most crews. His preferred method involved drifting far offshore to target sharks and other large fish. These journeys required patience and physical endurance but offered higher potential profit. On this particular trip, Alvarenga was not scheduled to work alone. He departed with a younger crew member, Ezequiel Cordoba, who had limited experience in open ocean fishing. The boat they used was a small fiberglass vessel approximately 7 meters in length, equipped with a single outboard motor, a canopy for shade, and no enclosed cabin. There was no satellite phone. Communication relied on a basic radio with limited range. They carried supplies meant for a 2-day journey. These included ice to preserve fish, fuel for the engine, bottled water, fishing lines, hooks, and a small amount of food. The navigation equipment consisted of a compass and a handheld GPS unit powered by batteries. There was no emergency beacon. The decision to travel far offshore was routine for Alvarenga. Weather forecasts at the time did not predict severe conditions. The sea appeared calm at departure. The boat left the coast in daylight and headed west, gradually passing beyond the range of visual landmarks. Once the shoreline disappeared, the journey became dependent on instruments and weather patterns. The crew expected to return within 48 hours. No formal tracking system existed for their departure. Their families were accustomed to delayed returns, and missing a scheduled time was not unusual. There was no immediate sign that this trip would differ from the others. The conditions appeared stable, and the route was familiar. The only distinction was distance. They traveled farther than most boats from Costa Azul. Beyond that point, the ocean offered no indication of risk. Several hours into the journey, weather conditions began to change. The sky darkened without the sharp contrast typical of tropical storms. Wind increased gradually rather than suddenly. By the time the waves became uneven, the coastline was already beyond visual range. The radio stopped receiving clear signals. The GPS unit remained functional, but the battery level dropped faster than expected. The crew attempted to continue fishing, assuming the weather system would pass within a few hours. Instead, the wind strengthened and rain reduced visibility. The boat's canopy provided limited protection and began to tear at its anchor points. The engine remained operational, but fuel consumption increased as Alvarenga attempted to stabilize their position. Over the next 2 days, the storm persisted. Rainwater filled containers meant for storing fish. Waves reached heights that made controlled movement difficult. The crew lost some fishing equipment when lines snapped or were pulled overboard. At some point during the 3rd day, the engine stopped. The exact cause was never determined. The fuel tank was later believed to have been contaminated with seawater. Without power, the boat drifted freely. The GPS battery failed soon after, leaving only a compass. The radio no longer transmitted. With no means of propulsion, their position became dependent on wind and current. The storm gradually weakened, but by that time, their orientation was unclear. The sea surface returned to relative calm, but the direction of movement could not be verified. They attempted to paddle using improvised tools, but the effort had little effect. This marked the moment when the situation changed from delayed return to uncontrolled drift. The coastline could no longer be located. The nearest shipping lanes were hundreds of miles away. The supplies on board were already reduced by several days of exposure and loss. The absence of engine power created a permanent condition. There was no reliable method to signal their location. The boat continued to float, but it was no longer navigating. From that point onward, all movement occurred without deliberate control. The storm ended, but the consequences remained. After the storm passed, the ocean returned to a steady rhythm. The surface remained active, but no longer violent. The sky cleared. There was no visible land. The boat drifted in a consistent direction, though the men could not determine which. Without instruments, the only reference points were the sun and stars, both of which offered limited practical guidance. Their remaining supplies were minimal. Most of the bottled water had been lost during the storm. The ice had melted and drained away. The small amount of food they carried had already been consumed. What remained was fishing equipment and a few empty containers. From that point onward, survival depended on adaptation. Alvarenga began catching fish using hand lines. The raw flesh provided protein, but no hydration. They collected rainwater when possible by spreading plastic sheets and clothing. During dry periods, they drank small amounts of turtle blood or the fluid from fish eyes, methods known in maritime survival but rarely practiced for long durations. Fire was not available. All food was consumed raw. Sharks were sometimes caught, though they were difficult to manage. Sea birds were captured when they landed on the boat. Their feathers were removed, and the meat eaten without cooking. Bones were crushed and swallowed when possible. No part was wasted. The younger crew member, Cordoba, struggled to tolerate the diet. He refused several meals and became weak. Over time, his condition deteriorated. He stopped eating entirely after a few weeks. His body lost mass, and his movements slowed. Eventually, he died quietly on the boat. The exact date was never recorded. Alvarenga remained alone. Daily routine became rigid. Each morning, he checked the sky for clouds. Rain meant water. No rain meant rationing. Fishing occurred continuously. Sleep was fragmented, limited by the need to monitor lines and avoid drifting into the water. The sun caused severe burns. Skin peeled and darkened. Saltwater exposure created open sores that did not heal. There was no calendar. Time was measured only through cycles of exhaustion and hunger. Months passed without external reference. The boat drifted steadily westward, carried by ocean currents later identified as the North Equatorial Current. Occasionally, large ships passed in the distance. The boat was too small to be detected. Alvarenga attempted to signal using debris and movement, but no vessel altered course. The distance between them remained constant. Mental discipline became a practical necessity. He avoided extended reflection. Focus remained on immediate tasks. Fishing. Collecting water. Repairing minor damage. Removing barnacles. Preventing lines from tangling. The boat slowly degraded. Plastic surfaces cracked. Shade cover disintegrated. Fishing hooks rusted and broke. Clothing dissolved from salt exposure. The hull remained intact, but everything else deteriorated. There were no markers of progress. No confirmation of movement. No sound other than wind and water. The sea remained consistent. The horizon did not change. The isolation became permanent through repetition, not through shock. The drift continued across thousands of miles without intervention. The boat moved through international waters without detection. No rescue attempts were initiated because no official distress signal had ever been recorded. On land, Alvarenga was presumed lost at sea. No search was conducted beyond the local region. The survival process became self-contained. There was no longer a destination, only continuity. Each day ended the same way it began. The ocean provided both sustenance and threat. Nothing else existed within reach. After Cordoba's death, the structure of survival changed. Alvarenga no longer divided tasks or supplies. The routines remained, but without shared responsibility. The physical environment stayed consistent, yet the social dimension disappeared completely. There was no conversation, no external feedback, and no practical reason to speak aloud. The absence of a second person altered the use of space. The boat felt larger but less functional. Equipment deteriorated more quickly without maintenance support. Fishing lines were repaired more often. Hooks were lost and replaced with improvised tools made from wire and fragments of plastic. Health declined gradually. The human body is not adapted for long-term raw marine diets. Alvarenga developed chronic joint pain. His gums bled intermittently, a symptom consistent with vitamin deficiencies. Vision fluctuated during periods of dehydration. Skin infections spread slowly across exposed areas. Wounds remained open for weeks. Psychological strain increased, but it did not present as panic. It manifested as flattening. Emotional response diminished. There were no expectations left to manage. Survival became procedural rather than motivated. Each action occurred because it was required, not because it promised improvement. The passage of time became abstract. Without calendar markers, months could only be inferred through seasonal shifts in temperature and light. Some days passed without rain. Others brought brief storms that filled containers and offered temporary relief. During dry intervals, hydration came almost entirely from turtle blood and rainwater stored in deteriorating plastic. The body adapted in limited ways. Hunger no longer produced strong discomfort. Thirst remained the dominant physical signal. Sleep cycles shifted. Rest occurred in short intervals, often while holding fishing lines to avoid losing equipment overboard. Isolation extended without variation. There were no landmarks, no new stimuli, and no change in routine. The ocean current continued its westward movement, gradually carrying the boat toward Micronesia. The distance traveled was not known at the time. Later estimates suggested more than 6,700 miles. At no point during the second year did any organized search intersect with the boat's location. The drift passed through regions with low maritime traffic. Even when vessels appeared on the horizon, the scale difference made visual detection unlikely. The survival condition did not worsen dramatically. It simply continued. There were no decisive failures, only accumulated fatigue and physical decline. The primary threat became not external danger, but the gradual erosion of the body's capacity to function. The ocean did not change. The boat did not stop. The situation remained unresolved through endurance alone. On January 30, 2014, the boat made contact with land. The impact was not violent. The hull struck shallow water and slowed as it moved into a narrow coastal inlet. The location was later identified as Eben Atoll, part of the Marshall Islands in the western Pacific Ocean. Alvarenga did not immediately recognize the shoreline as inhabited. The vegetation appeared dense and uniform, similar to many uninhabited islands across the region. After more than a year without visual reference to land, depth perception and distance judgment were impaired. The presence of trees did not guarantee safety. He exited the boat and collapsed on the beach. Local residents discovered him later that day. He was barefoot, wearing minimal clothing, and unable to speak clearly. His body weight had declined significantly. He exhibited signs of severe dehydration, malnutrition, and skin infection. The residents provided water and transported him to a nearby medical facility. His identity was not confirmed immediately. Communication required translation between Spanish and local languages. Over the following days, he was stabilized and interviewed by authorities. Medical examination confirmed prolonged exposure to maritime conditions. There were no major internal injuries. The primary complications were nutritional deficiencies and chronic skin damage. Recovery required months, not weeks. The fishing boat was documented and photographed. Its condition supported a long-duration drift. There was no engine function. Most original equipment was missing or degraded. The hull remained intact due to fiberglass construction. The distance between Costa Azul and Eben Atoll exceeded 6,700 miles. Ocean current analysis confirmed that the route was consistent with known drift patterns. There was no evidence of external assistance during the journey. The survival was recorded by international media and maritime researchers. Some skepticism emerged initially, but physical evidence and current modeling supported the account. No contradictory data was established. The drift had ended not through navigation, but through geographic coincidence. The boat intersected land after more than 13 months without directional control. There was no final decision that led to rescue. Only sustained movement across open ocean. Following his recovery, Salvador Alvarenga returned to Central America. His account was documented by journalists, medical staff, and maritime authorities. The survival period was confirmed through travel distance modeling, weather records, and vessel condition. While exact daily details remained unverifiable, the overall trajectory aligned with known oceanic behavior. Alvarenga did not resume commercial fishing. His physical condition improved gradually, but long-term damage remained. He experienced persistent joint pain and sensitivity to sunlight. Psychological assessments described no acute trauma symptoms, but prolonged isolation had altered his relationship with routine and time. The case entered maritime survival literature as one of the longest confirmed solo drifts in recorded history. It contributed data to studies on ocean currents, dehydration thresholds, and human dietary tolerance under extreme conditions. There was no formal conclusion beyond documentation. The incident did not change maritime safety regulations. Small-scale fishing operations in the region continued under similar conditions. No tracking systems were added. No new emergency protocols were established. The survival itself remained an isolated record. It did not represent a repeatable model. It demonstrated only that extended drift without rescue is possible under specific conditions. It offered no guidance, no strategy, and no recommendation. The Pacific continued to operate under the same patterns that had carried the boat across its surface. The currents remained constant. The distance remained unchanged. The survival did not alter the ocean. It existed as a single trajectory across a vast, indifferent system.